Thank you very much. Today, we are joined by Dr. Sutton from the University of South Carolina. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. Mm-hmm. Welcome, Dr. Sutton.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here. This is an open space where we can talk about not only your research and your experiences in research, but we can also talk about your personal life, because we get to learn that even professors do have personal lives.
Yeah.
So just to start off from a very easy, open space, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, your life experiences and your journey into your professional life, and how that has been for you? It's navigating Nano. So how has that trajectory been for you? Yes.
How far back do I go?
As far as you can.
Okay.
Yes.
I was born in California, mm-hmm. and I was born in a town called Lodi, California, which is its claim to fame is the fact that it's named. It shows up in a CCR song, which is a famous rock band from the 70s. The song is about being stuck in Lodi and how sad that is, But actually, Lodi is a beautiful town, so I think it had to just rhyme in the song. That's why I used it. But still, it's quite funny, just like you hear your hometown, which is a small sort of obscure place, named in a song. But Lodi was a beautiful place. I liked California a lot. And when I was quite young, my parents divorced and my mom moved to Arkansas. And so I spent a lot of my time between the two places, between California and Arkansas. And that was good and bad in a couple ways. One, of course, you got to sort of see very different environments and how that leads to sort of how the structures itself are there. And so you have different sort of pathways for people because of opportunities through education, and most of those are sort of funded by the state level. So how much they invest in education, how much they invest in universities, for example. I think California does a really, really good job with that. They have a lot of renowned universities. Arkansas could do a better job with that because, they have basically one flagship university. But nonetheless, I benefited a lot from, actually, when I started to consider going to undergrad, I stayed in Arkansas because they have these remarkable fellowships that allow you, and scholarships that pay for your whole education, basically, if you're a pretty decent student.
Yeah.
So I did my undergrad in Arkansas, because even at that time I had kind of already knew that I was going to go into it for a long run, like into education. Like I would be in grad school, and so why spend too much money on undergrad and just accumulate the debt? So having those sort of educational opportunities, having a free education, kept me in Arkansas, and which was a really good decision, actually, because I met a key mentor of mine that I was not really interested in chemistry. In fact, I was sort of on this pre-med track as I started undergrad. And after my first year, I was approached by my advisor, who became my advisor actually in undergrad, Pat DeRocher, and he said, would you like to do some research with me? Because I was in his class. And I was supposed to go on a sort of a trip that summer. And so I did go on part of the trip. I came back and did research. And that turned into, what became later my career. What is now my career, essentially, was just basically an undergraduate professor asking me to do research and get me involved really early on. And two things happened that summer. One is that I got involved in research, which became my career. The second is that I met a really good friend in that same lab, and we're still friends today. And we, 18 years later now, like we still call each other and stuff. In fact, she's coming down to visit me tomorrow in Columbia. Wow. She's kind of like an aunt to my kids and stuff. So, it's funny how these little things like that, these little decisions, just sort of stack up over time and lead to completely different life experiences.
It's very interesting. There must have been something that professor saw in you for him to ask you to get into research with him. Well, what did you like about his class? Because he must have identified some potential in you for him to ask you. Were you an active participant in answering questions?
Well, what's funny about that is I don't think I was a particularly good student, because I think what happens is if you have some aptitude in a topic, you don't really learn how to prepare well. You don't need to do that. So, in fact, I probably, I can recall kind of procrastinating studying for tests and all that. I still did well in this class, of course, but it took me. I'm not sure how impressive I would be as a student, because I think the students I'm most impressed with now are ones that are very well prepared, and they're kind of on it. And I don't think I was quite like that. It took me a while to get to that point, because I had to sort of learn that the hard way, because it was not something I learned earlier in life. So yeah, it's a good question, like sort of why he asked me to do research for his lab. But it was really lucky. I mean, he had a grant at the time from the ACS, American Chemical Society, PRF fund.
Okay.
And so that which really allowed for him to fund students. And so, and it's a limited opportunity. The funds don't go very far, but still,
Okay, that's very good. And I'll just jump really far. You said that him choosing you, the funding that he had, may have been a reason as to why he chose you. Probably he selected other students from your class. Maybe there's a possibility. But I would like to know, I think I just lost the question. But you have talked about your undergrad and the decision that you made to go into academia, the choice that you made in such an early stage. And I think in this podcast, we haven't been able to address that journey from making a decision to go into, a bachelor's degree, then transition into graduate school. And you have talked a bit about how expensive education can be in undergrad for you to make that choice into going to graduate school. For you to have made that decision, could you talk a little bit, maybe more of an advice, if an undergrad student was listening to this, what it really takes, that investment into undergrad education and that choice to maybe get into industry or to get into academia? Like, how would you advise an undergrad student making that decision to get into graduate school? Or maybe to get into academia as well?
Right, yeah. So, well, I mean, there's clear advantages to going into grad school. And so things that I think attracted me then that still are true now is the fact that the higher education level you achieve, typically that translates to a higher paying job. So the more comfortable life you can live. Yeah. Because it opens up a lot of opportunities that just aren't available earlier in education. So if you get a bachelor's degree, that sort of limits you in some what you can do. I'm not entirely. I mean, obviously, I have my brother-in-law got a bachelor's degree, and he's very successful in what he does. So it's not like there's no opportunities, but on average, I think that's true. And the benefit for the sciences, and that was certainly attractive to me, was the fact that it is a free higher education. So you could go to grad school for free. They pay you to go, which seemed like such a miracle in some sense, because I was sort of confronted with the reality of, do I pay for medical school, which is obscenely expensive, and that's a whole different problem. Or do I go to something that actually you get paid to develop a new skill set? So I think in terms of making that decision for individually, obviously it's an individual decision, and a lot of it is just trying to figure out. And there's probably things I would have done differently if I knew now. If I knew then what I know now, for example, certain degrees pay better than other degrees. There's a hierarchy there. So if you're really in it to try to maximize your earning potential, then you should start from the end and look at what the average salaries are for these different careers. On the other hand, if you're in it for trying to find things that are a little bit less tangible, like income, in your life, which is something like a community of researchers that you get to see at conferences, then academia is good for that. So there's a lot of benefits that you gain sort of on a personal level, which you sacrifice maybe on a financial level for this career.
Yeah, and I think that's one question that we normally get here. A lot of people looking at industry and academia. There is money in industry, there is less in academia, but people make that choice to be in academia because of passion, that interest, or that drive. I just remember the question I wanted to ask you. So you did mention that you are not such a hardworking student, but your PI selected you. Does that affect or influence the way you choose your students now, or the students that you get to work with?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. Yeah, I think so. I think I'm very open-minded, or I hope I'm very open-minded in like the students I choose. I think obviously we're here because we're in this profession because it's a training. We're here to train people. So there's an acceptance of responsibility of having patience and because you're going to train somebody. So the assumption is they come in unprepared and you sort of train them up a little bit. And I think I like that aspect. I haven't thought about this before, but I like that aspect of it because I really feel that's what sort of has happened to me in his career. You know, you sort of I remember when I encountered Pat DeRocher, who's my undergrad advisor that I'm referring to, and I was just so admired him deeply because he could, you know, he was so qualified for his job and stuff, and you could just see the sort of I come from a very blue collar family, so my dad's a mechanic, my mom drove school bus typically. That was primarily her job when I was younger. So seeing somebody who spent all his time writing papers, analyzing results was totally new for me.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that and thinking, that's a pretty good, cool gig because it's much more sort of intellectually engaging than what you typically expect.
Exactly. And I think most of us, it's always just looking at the generation before as well, our parents, what they are, what they were, and you want to do better.
Yeah.
You want
Exactly.
you grow that society so that the next generation does better. Now, to more technical questions. So you have a strong chemistry background, but today from your presentation, we're talking about machine learning. How did how did that not even the transition, how did you make that choice of studying a BSc in chemistry, then going into machine learning?
Yeah, so during my undergrad, I went to a small undergrad, which had a computer science department, and in fact, in our town, we had a company called Axiom, which is a tech company, and a lot of my friends were in computer science. I went on to that early on, but even then, it kind of seemed to me that a computer science degree at that point, a bachelor's, is still pretty similar to like a blue collar job where it's just like 8 to 5. You know, you kind of are, you're paid to produce a result, you know, a product. And sort of, so there was a little bit of a weird vibe in the career I saw that a lot of my friends were taking. I wasn't sort of interested in that, you know, working on an assembly line kind of job. I wanted something with a bit more intellectual engagement. So I was always interested in the skill set in mathematics. My minor was in math as an undergrad, and I was in the chemistry department, I think largely because the opportunities that were available. It just, we didn't have a chemical engineering department. You know, I didn't really fit very well with the computer science career aspect, so somehow chemistry just kind of was there in some cases, and in some sense, I mean. And so, but as I started doing chemistry, I realized pretty early on, unfortunately, even though Pat DeRocher is an experimentalist and I was in an experimentalist lab, I didn't really like doing a lot of experiments.
Okay.
I found something about it to be that whole trial and error of mix this together and see if it works. And if you don't like that, or if it doesn't work, try heating it higher or mix it with a different solvent. Or
the optimization part. Yeah.
And just such that trial and error was so random and tedious. I just did not like that chaos of it, you know. And so I liked computation because it kind of was straightforward. You put some input in and you ask the computer a question and it gives you an answer, you know. And so it was a bit more a direct result given some input. And you could build stuff with it. So part of what I like about chemistry is that you can invent new things, you know, and it's beautiful to make inorganic compounds. They have different colors, they have different properties, you know, visually it's really attractive. And so it's fun to be able to mix something together that has to be new like that and make crystals of it and stuff. You can do the same thing. I get the same fulfillment out of programming or developing new tools because there's a process of creation still, you know, where maybe you can make something that's useful for somebody else or that somebody else has done before. And so I still find that desire is being satisfied even in the computational side. But something that I get from computation, which I didn't get from experiments, was that I feel a bit more productive since we, you know, there are always a good outcome. There's always an outcome from the simulations, you know.
That is quicker. They
take a long time. No, I don't think. I think you can do experiment. I mean, certainly if you're starting something brand new and you're totally exploratory synthesis, that can take a very long time if you don't know where to start. But most experimentalists start from a paper that's been published already, right? I mean, it's been a while since I did experiments, so I'm you know, projecting here a bit. But when we would start from somebody who had published something, and then we start asking questions like, okay, so they did this process, the synthesis. What if you changed X in that process? Or what if we wanted to make instead of this ligand they use, what if we wanted to change the ligand and still make the same compound? Would that be better for some, so very fundamental questions, but it was sometimes hard to understand. And I think sometimes this is still the case, where it's hard to understand if there's actually going to be, if that's going to work, first of all, so it's a bit dangerous, not dangerous, but exploratory, or if there's going to be any good outcomes from that, what use is that? And so it's very fundamental work, which is fundamentally useful, but it's not but I like a bit more applied stuff where there's an objective, can you fix this goal, can you do something that's going to fix this problem? So
in those objectives, how reliant are you in, people who do the experimental stuff? Because it's chemistry and you're modeling, or you're coming up with algorithms to predict something. So how reliant are you on the people who really do the wet lab and what you actually do in?
Well, I love working with experimentalists. Most of my projects fund some component of theory and some component of experimentalists. Well, I would say half, not most. The other half fund all theory people working together, or computational people, to build better tools. And so I get enjoyment out of both groups.
Okay.
So how reliant are we on experimentalists? It is always very fun to make a prediction and see that it comes out in reality. That's a wonderful feeling. It is always fun to build better tools that can do something that you couldn't do before, and to gain some insight or gain some level rigor that wasn't quite possible if you hadn't put in the time to develop or to program this. So in both ways, I find that this sort of sense of exploration and trying to fix things is satisfied. I mean, we're not totally dependent on having experimentalists,
Okay.
Somebody referred to one time, which ticks me off a bit, referred to computational people as like drummers. We're just there in the background accompanying, and everyone needs a good drummer is what the guy was saying. I totally disagree, We're not just drummers. I mean, it's a legitimate instrument, I mean, not to say drumming is not an instrument, but I mean, it's not like you need, it's kind of hard to imagine somebody just drumming in a band.
Yeah.
And that was the sort of image that came to my head. But, I think you could perform a lot of science with computational tools, and theoreticians have done that for a long period of time. Like some of the first early theoreticians that applied quantum mechanics, at least, were trying to understand why oxygen could be paramagnetic, for example, and can you come up with the theory behind that, right? And so there's a lot of quantum mechanics that is required to understand the bonding in that case.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I'm very bio, so when you try to bring in the aspect of machine learning and chemistry, it's a little bit, confusing from my perspective.
Because it's new? Confusing?
It's not new. Actually, we do a lot of machine learning with bio. It's actually one of my questions that I had written for you was like, why chemistry? Why not biology? Why not apply machine learning in bio? Like, in your lab, is it just, the long-term goal is just to remain in chemistry and designing those models for chemistry, or are you looking at potential applications in bio as well? Like there's a lot of potential in drug design using machine learning.
There's a lot of potential. There's also a lot of activity, and there's a lot of experts who are working on it. And so part of it is just where can we use our time productively that we're not going to be competing with somebody who has a much bigger operation. And pharmaceutical companies, are hard to compete with.
Is it really about the competition? It's about the solution. Well, thinking about it, because what you're trying to do is finding solutions on how to better the synthesis of materials, chemistry materials, from your perspective. But, there are also other applications. But, that is from my perspective, if I were to have the opportunity to learn machine learning.
So we do, I do think there's a huge potential of AI in a lot of different fields.
Yeah.
And not just chemistry. That's totally true. And I do think that, for example, we have one project that was just funded by the NSF last year, which is applying AI for improving health outcomes.
Yes.
Which is, what we proposed, if it works out, like the potential of that is remarkable. So, it's a very fun project, but it's also, there are a lot of variables that are at play when trying to understand why somebody is sick, or whether or not a drug will work for that specific person, or that specific pathology. So the questions become much more difficult to answer and a bit more long-term, I don't know, a little bit more chaotic. So it requires longer to sort of solve these problems too.
Yeah.
So you have to have a balance of things that you feel like you could solve in the short term, but bigger questions that you can try to solve in the long term. And the only thing in our projects, the only thing that sort of connects those two is methods. Can we come up with some sort of permutation of a method that works here, and then try to fix that method to work in these longer term projects like AI for health.
Okay, very interesting. And I think machine learning has great potential, considering now we have, models, machine learning thinking on our behalf and giving us results. So
it's not going away, right? I mean,
it's
here to stay.
Yeah, it's already here to stay. And I think there's a lot of debate on whether AI is good for us. I think the other day Biden was talking about it, like AI is here, but what are the potential applications? What are the potential limitations that are going to come with it? Like, what are the demerits that come with AI?
Sure.
Yeah, so that is a very big debate, and we cannot finish. But you're already you're doing the chemistry aspect of it.
Yeah. When I gave my faculty talk in my department, I came in just, I drank the Kool-Aid already because I spent 5 years sort of working on this stuff.
Yeah.
So I came into the chemistry department. I was like, we're going to do this with AI and that with AI and that with AI. And most people, I would say, probably were a little bit hesitant to buy into that idea.
And a lot of people are not willing to embrace it.
But for a couple of reasons, right? I mean, not only is it sort of hard to understand what it's doing, and therefore there's a level of skepticism because it's sort of treated as a black box. But part of it is also sort of the potential for danger from AI, right? So it's sort of twofold. There's two aspects that I think lead to a lot of skepticism. I mean, regarding how AI is going to sort of displace jobs and all that. I mean, that's obviously a big concern, and that's a broader topic than AI and chemistry specifically.
Yeah. One other question that I had is that you've had the experience of being in Berlin as a postdoc.
Yes.
And now you have been in the US, you're an American citizen, you've had an experience of being outside there. How has that international experience influenced the way you do your research, establish collaborations? Do you do collaborations internally, or do you have like international collaborators as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I remember when I was sort of looking at, somehow, probably because I spent a lot of time in Arkansas, I was sort of eager to go abroad and have some other experience. And there's only, in my opinion, there's really only sort of a period of your life where you could do that. Right? Like once you get a little bit older, you start having kids, then it becomes a lot harder to move.
Yes.
And thankfully, so I think my family only traveled abroad. The first time traveling abroad, it was to come see us when we lived abroad. So I had nobody in my family who had traveled abroad before. I mean, even to Mexico, like that, even to next door, even Canada, like that to them.
But you travel within America, I hope.
Yeah, exactly. But still, like the idea of going to a foreign country, there was a significant barrier. And in my family's minds. And so somehow, to me though, that was sort of like a fun adventure to think about. And I remember when I started looking at this even in undergrad, and I remember at that time, it just seemed like really difficult to find a place to go do research. And I think as an undergrad, I think part of the problem, for a broad experience, and I think part of the problem is that our educational systems are a bit separate. We have a different sort of process for what the bachelor degree is and what college looks like. So undergrads here typically is like basically like a high school experience there, right?
Exactly.
So there's a little bit of a level shift, and I think that sort of, I think I picked up on that difference, and so somehow it seemed like it wasn't possible to do it as an undergrad. But that's why for a postdoc, it seemed like an ideal time. And I was lucky that there was this sort of opportunity to go, and I was lucky that it was in a topic I was very interested in. And what's typically not the case is, when you hire a postdoc, postdocs are expensive, much more expensive and they have PhDs, and they're much more expensive than graduate students. And so if you're going to hire a postdoc, you want that postdoc to probably do something that's in their expertise. Right? You come in, they're going to lift up a project and carry a project and run with it. And it's very hard to find postdoc opportunities that provide additional training, even though that's the premise of it. The postdoc is like an additional training step by definition. but it's actually, I think, practically very hard to find that. This was an opportunity when I went to Germany. It was exactly that. It was an opportunity for me to learn machine learning, which was hard to find in the States for postdocs. And part of that was facilitated by the fellowship I got at the ABH, which was sort of gave me this a bit of independence and autonomy. So I was able to, use that as a reason for learning something new. So I was paying for myself essentially. That makes it a lot easier to spend your time learning something new. So, but I was still hesitant to go actually to Germany. And I remember talking to my father-in-law, and my wife's family has traveled a lot abroad. They're academics, and he said, you should go, just go for a year. You never know what an experience like that will have on you, know. And it's absolutely true. We ended up staying for like 5 years, So
why didn't you stay longer? Like get an opportunity there as well.
I mean, that's a longer story, but I think COVID really. We have kids. We had our son abroad. It was COVID. We felt very far away from our family. And everyone was getting older here, and we were looking for opportunities to come back and kind of see our family a lot more. And that was a great decision. Moving back, we've got to see our family way more than we did when we were in Europe, and that's great when you have 2 kids.
Okay. So that what you're saying is that your first experience with machine learning was as a postdoc.
As a postdoc, yeah. I mean, I started getting into the topic because I was at Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech is a center for computer science, and so there's some exposure. They were offering classes. It was a very popular topic at Georgia Tech. You couldn't get away from it even then. But in my first time like digging into it deeply and trying to learn about it was during my extended postdoc stay.
And now you having that experience, you were in Georgia Tech. Did you do chemistry in Georgia Tech?
Yeah.
So, and you having to learn machine learning, which I believe was it was trained, but you had to do a lot of self-teaching. It was trained, but you had self-teaching.
And the field's moving quickly, right? So it's not like you're learning something that's been fixed in time.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 years of machine learning is old now.
Yeah.
So things move quickly.
So for somebody who would be interested in, using machine learning, whatever field they are in, like I'm in bio, and I'm really interested in not just machine learning, but, the computational aspects of, modeling stuff. Like if I can have a way of optimizing my experiments before I go into the lab to make it easier for me, how would you advise, a PhD student interested in machine learning to apply in whatever subject that they are in?
So the model that's worked really well for us, for me, in learning this topic has been sort of a couple of, first you have to find a collaborator and somebody who's an expert. I think that makes it easier. So I've had some excellent collaborators. They're all computer scientists and they're expert in machine learning. And then I become like, during my postdoc, it was like becoming the internal, I mean, that's not really true this way because our whole institute was sort of devoted to this topic, but we all became like experts on it for our plot application. And through that application, you really sort of get experience in the topic generally. It gives you a lot of confidence to start to read the literature more. So you sort of, eventually you can become the expert, but I think it's very helpful to first have an expert in machine learning or some domain expert holding your hand and kind of walking you through the process.
And that is very challenging. And like you said, postdocs or people are supposed to be experts where they're having to add something into the lab they're going into. But now, considering those limitations, like I have the basic, but I need to grow it. But I would also like to work in a lab as a postdoc where they actually use more machine learning.
That's a tricky situation even for my group. I don't hire people with machine learning experience. I hire people who want to get machine learning experience, but they come in.
So you teach them, you train them.
I have to, right? I mean,
but as graduates or as postdocs?
Postdocs. My postdocs, I hire people, none of whom have machine learning experience. That's just not something they were taught. But what they all do have is some core technical expertise, typically programming, that they can quickly learn it through applications. So just like I learned from a computer scientist by applying it directly to a problem, and what helped me do that is the technical barrier to that is, how comfortable are you with math? Because that's all machine learning. I mean, machine learning came from computer science, which came from mathematics. So that's sort of its history, which is separate from the sciences like chemistry, the physical sciences,
Yeah.
were a bit more empirical, they're a bit more mathematical. So as long as you're comfortable with mathematics, then you can pick it up quickly. And as long as you have some core expertise like programming, then it's easy to pick up, I think.
Okay. Now,
I mean, it takes
advice.
time, but
Yeah.
I mean, those are the two main barriers, I think, overall.
Yeah. Now, you're a PI. Advice from PI to PI. How would you advise a PI who is in that phase of like, I need postdocs who have an experience, but you would like them to embrace students who are willing to learn, postdocs who are willing to learn, and he has to put in some energy. He needs to put in some level of skill building. How would you advise a PI like that who is rigid to an extent that he's not willing to take up students who don't have the skills, but are not willing to train them from a PI to another PI?
Well, there are a lot of groups in this country, right? There's a lot of people doing science.
Yes.
And so I would say, instead of advising the PI, I would say, the postdoc needs to find a good fit, right? There's going to be somewhere that's going to allow the postdoc to do what they want to do.
Okay. But so you don't have an advice for PI to PI?
I'm just starting out in this job. Who am I to try to advise? I mean, if somebody came to me and asked me, what's your opinion about training new students versus training or taking experienced students on, I would say, so far for me, training new students has been fine. Training new postdocs in this field has been fine.
Is it expensive to train postdocs?
There's some diminished, if you come in as an expert, you can immediately hit the ground running. Okay. There's a learning curve if you're not an expert, right? You have to learn something. But, I mean, we're always learning new things in this field, right? Yeah. It's rare. And the projects I tend to be interested in require kind of trying to go in a new direction. Yeah. I mean, that's my ultimate goal. I'm not sure if we succeed, but that's where I like to go. And as a result, it's always this process of learning. So, rare is that you just have the same sort of hammer and you're hitting away at the same nail, right? Yeah. So we're always trying to sort of evolve in some way in that sense. So there's always that little bit of overhead, I think.
Okay. Now, my second last question.
Okay.
How do you envision the future of material design evolving with the continued integration of machine learning and computational approaches? How do you envision that future to look like for material design? With the integration of the use of machine learning and computational approaches.
Yeah. So I think a couple things are going to happen. One is going to be that there is going to be widespread use of machine learning, and every department is going to have somebody with this expertise. Yeah. That's an initiative from the U.S. government. Right? The White House just put out a directive to push the DOE to train 500 experts by 2025. So there's a huge amount of interest in it. The U.S. government's investing significantly in the field, I think mainly to stay sort of ahead of other competitors internationally. But so that's going to sort of affect everything we do, first of all. Yeah. Second of all is, I think, more specifically of how it's going to affect materials and even materials discovery is, I think you're going to find that there is a localization of a lot of research, because what's going to take over soon is going to be these autonomous systems. And there are a few departments that have identified, groups effectively, that have identified that a while ago and have started already investing in things to replace graduate students or whomever from doing the pipetting. Yeah. Right? Yes. And robotics. Yeah, exactly. And so those groups have a significant advantage. They're several years ahead of everyone else. And so there's going to be a lot of research that comes out of that once they build those systems. And there's a lot of work that's been happening over the past 5 years that seems very, very promising. So I think you're going to see some interesting sort of conflicts that occur there, where right now there's not a current user. So typically the U.S. government does a really great job through federal funding of having these user facilities, right? So for example, it doesn't matter what university I'm at, if I have a project that's funded by the federal government, or otherwise I could even apply for time independently, I could still apply for time on the U.S. clusters that are funded by the U.S. government to do research, right? It's hard, it's expensive to build certain synchrotron facilities. So the U.S. government has invested in that, and you can apply for time to go and use that time, right? So the U.S. government has invested in some core research tools that allows people to come use those. I wonder what that's going to look like for these sort of synthesis robotics.
Yeah.
Is it the case the U.S. government is going to build something where you can just submit stuff and then it will build it for you? You know, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting question. Or is it just that certain labs are going to have a huge advantage because they're able to do a lot of research quickly? You know? And you know, there's always been these sort of disparate. There's always been advantages sort of baked into the system, depending on what investments were made at different universities. So that's not anything new, but it's an interesting. I wonder where that's going to go.
Yeah.
I think either way, I think I'm optimistic about what's going to happen, because I think just like, I don't know if you've used ChatGPT or if you're familiar with it, but this sort of making these AI models that are public, as we saw already, right, with ChatGPT, when it came online about a year ago, has an incredible effect. It changed things in significant ways already since then. And the current push in my field right now is to come up with those so-called like foundation models, which are basically something like ChatGPT, which is something that's been developed to a really, really large data set, and it's totally usable on its own. So like a little, you know, package that you can use that's going to be publicly available, and then you can subsequently refine. So that word is going to appear a lot, foundation models. And there's a bit of a, you know, just like, you know, people can use ChatGPT as a black box.
Yes.
And it might give you something that's totally dumb. And there's been a lot of people have shown that already the past 6 months, that not everything that ChatGPT says is actually correct, for example, right? Or it's really bad at math. I mean, there's been refinements because they've been training the model.
Coding too. I had it's very bad at coding. Can give you like wrong codes as well.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, you know, but there is an interesting, but nonetheless, there's an advantage to this, and the advantage is that there is a process of using these AI tools and models to speed things up, right? So you can spend your time thinking deeply about something because you didn't have to go find the textbook that allowed you to learn about this one paragraph which you didn't know about, you know, to understand the rest of the book, you know. So I mean, it sort of facilitates learning. I think ChatGPT does to a certain extent. It facilitates learning, and I think that's the sort of acceleration that we'll see even in science. That you'll see that the making these AI models publicly available is going to speed a lot of research up overall. And so that's going to be really interesting what happens, right, with sort of innovation, how that scales.
Exactly. And we recently had a professor who was talking about automated labs. So he is making automated labs where people don't have to do the pipetting like you mentioned. So his lab is way ahead of what a lot of us are already doing. And there's a lot of potential that AI or machine learning has moving forward. And of course, we always need to think about what are the limitations of using AI as well. And I think it's such a privilege to have people already doing, you know, machine learning and artificial intelligence talk to us, and it helps us to open our mind to the potential of what we are doing and the greater career, you know, prospects that may lie ahead for us as graduate students. It's been such an honor. One thing that we normally do at the end of our session is the speaker gets to ask a question to the next speaker. So like you are here today, somebody asked a question last week for you, and you are going to leave us a question for our next speaker next week. So last week's speaker asked, football or basketball?
American football or?
I think we had the same debate. This question has become very common. Which one would? Well, we do have soccer,
so
which is ideally
watching or
football.
playing? Watching or playing?
Oh. Well, can you talk about both?
I think basketball is a much better sport to play for sure. You know?
Basketball?
Yeah.
Okay.
Much more, you know.
In terms of what?
Oh, you're running around a lot. You know, so it feels like a good extra workout, right?
Football runs a lot.
That's true, but there's also a lot of colliding. No, that's true. You're right. That's true. But I think basketball is a little bit more high paced than football.
Oh.
Right?
I don't know. I would debate about that because football is ideally 90 minutes. How long is a basketball game?
Wait. Are we talking
Oh.
about soccer or are we talking about American football? I think you're talking about football.
I'm talking about soccer. I'm
Okay.
talking about
Okay.
soccer.
I was talking about American football
Well,
versus basketball.
My country, we play soccer. We don't play
Yeah,
football.
I understand.
Africa, we play soccer.
So I was comparing American football to basketball.
Okay.
You said that, yeah, that's what was a lot more fast.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
I
much
get
more
it.
fast-paced than American football.
Okay.
But not soccer.
Not soccer.
Yeah.
Well, I think I need to adjust myself to thinking when I talk about football in the US, it's American football.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for you, it's basketball.
Yes.
Do you play it?
No, I'm terrible
Ever
at basketball.
tried?
I'm terrible at basketball.
What game do you play?
In high school, I played American soccer.
Okay, American soccer. So you don't, what do you do for fun?
What do? I garden.
Got it.
Yeah. I run now, and at a certain age, you have to run just to keep from getting too big. You know.
Yes.
So I have to run, and I really like to garden, and my son likes to garden. So he likes to garden because there's a little like gardening knife you use, and he likes to just cut stuff down. You know, whatever it is, he just likes. He feels like it's a sword or something. So, but nonetheless, it's a fun activity for us.
It's so wonderful to have talked to you, Dr. Sutton. And am I pronouncing it right?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Sutton. Sutton. Okay. Yeah, it's wonderful to have had you here. Thank you for joining us for the Navigating Nano podcast. You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube. And we got featured in a newspaper the other day. So, yeah, we are growing. Visibility is growing. Good. So you can follow us. And as we finish, please write down your question for me. It's been such an honor.
I should have said something more contentious then, during the podcast to help you grow, right? Something inflammatory. Then that's the way to do it, right? That's right.
Yes.